The moonlight fell like silver rain across the obsidian towers of the northern realm, where wolves sang to the night and ancient powers stirred beneath stone and shadow. It was here, in the fortress of eternal winter, that Lord Kale stood at the edge of his balcony, his amber eyes reflecting centuries of solitude, his heart a fortress no army had ever breached. He was the Alpha Lord, born of lightning and oath, a warrior whose very presence commanded mountains to bow and storms to still. But tonight something whispered through the wind a melody he had heard once before. In another lifetime, in another world, she appeared like starlight breaking through darkness. The albino elf moved through his hall as if she belonged to dreams rather than earth, her silver hair cascading like moonlit waterfalls, her violet eyes holding galaxies he did not know existed. She wore the robes of the Moon Court, the sacred order of mages who read destiny in the stars and wielded power older than kingdoms. Her name was Ilaria, and she had come to deliver a prophecy that would shatter everything he thought he knew about fate, about duty, about love. "You seek answers, Lord Kale?" she said, her voice like wind chimes in sacred groves. "But the truth you're searching for lives not in scrolls or stone. It lives in blood, in memory, in the spaces between what was and what must be." He turned to face her fully, and in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Something ancient stirred between them, recognition that transcended time, a pulse so powerful it felt like gravity itself had shifted. He took a step forward, drawn by forces he could not name, and she did not retreat. Instead, her eyes met his with a knowing that shook him to his core. "I've seen you before," he whispered, though logic told him it was impossible. "In dreams that feel more real than waking, and I have heard your voice," she replied, her hand trembling slightly at her side, "calling to me across lifetimes, across worlds that no longer exist." The Alpha Lord reached out, his callous warrior's hand hovering near her face, hesitating as if touching her might shatter the spell or confirm a truth too dangerous to acknowledge. When his fingers finally brushed her cheek, pale as morning frost, a surge of memory crashed through them, both visions of another time, another war, another Jin of themselves standing on opposite sides of a battle that had ended in tragedy and ash. "You were always mine," he breathed, the words escaping like a confession he had carried for centuries without knowing. "Even when the gods tried to tear us apart, even when they burned our world and scattered our souls, you were always mine." Tears glimmered in her violet eyes, reflecting the moonlight like liquid starlight. "And you were always my ruin and my salvation, the promise I should never have made, and the only truth I've ever known." Their story had begun 1,000 years before, in a realm where elves and wolves lived in fragile peace, where she had been a princess of light and he a young alpha learning to lead his pack. They had met in the Forbidden Forest, where magic bloomed wild and rules meant nothing beneath ancient oaks. They had loved in secret, stolen moments that felt like eternity, building a world between worlds where only they existed. But destiny, as it often does, had other plans. The war came like a black tide, consuming everything. Her people blamed his kind for a betrayal they did not commit. His pack sought vengeance for blood they believed she had spilled. Caught between loyalty and love, between family and heart, they had been forced to make impossible choices. The night their world ended, she had stood before him with a dagger in her hand and tears streaming down her face, tasked with a sacrifice that would either save her people or destroy them all. "I did what I had to do," she whispered now, in this present moment, this second chance the universe had somehow granted. "I ended our first life to save thousands. I carry that weight every day, every breath, every dream where I still see your eyes as you fell." Kale pulled her closer, his forehead touching hers, his breath mingling with hers in the space between confession and forgiveness. "I know," he said, his voice rough with emotion. I remembered everything the moment I touched you. I know why you did it, and I know it broke you as much as it broke me. But we're here now, Ilaria. Against every law of nature and magic, we found our way back to each other. That has to mean something. If this moment touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. It helps us bring more stories like this one, stories of love that transcends time itself. The days that followed were stolen moments of impossible joy. He showed her the lands he protected, the mountains where wolves ran free, and the northern lights painted the sky in colors that had no names. She shared with him the mysteries of her magic, the way she could read the future in water and light, the songs that could heal wounds or summon storms. They walked through snow-covered forests where their footprints vanished behind them, as if the universe itself wanted to protect their secret. At night, in chambers lit by firelight and candles, they spoke of dreams and fears, of the weight of leadership and the loneliness of power. He told her about the burden of being alpha, of making choices that cost lives to save nations, of nights when the howling of his wolves sounded like mourning. She confided her struggles with her gift, how knowing the future felt like carrying everyone's pain before it happened, how her prophecies had cost her everything she loved, including him in their first life. "Do you see our future now?" he asked one evening, as they stood on the balcony watching the moon rise full and luminous over the mountains. She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant, seeing things beyond the veil of normal sight. When she finally spoke, her voice carried sorrow and steel. "I see two paths, my love. In one, we have a brief moment of happiness before darkness claims us again. In the other, we sacrifice what we want most to save what matters most. But in both double quotes," she paused, her voice breaking slightly. "In both, we pay a terrible price. Then we choose the path together," he said firmly, turning her to face him, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "No more sacrificing each other for the greater good. Whatever comes, we face it side by side, but fate, as always, had been listening. The betrayal came from within, as they so often do. Lord Kael's most trusted general, consumed by jealousy and ancient prejudice, had been secretly communicating with the Shadow Court, a faction of dark mages who sought to overthrow both the Moon Court and the Wolf clans to seize power in the chaos. They had discovered the truth about Kael and Ilaria's past lives, and they planned to use that knowledge to tear apart the fragile peace between their peoples. "The Alpha Lord has been bewitched by elf magic," the general proclaimed before the assembled clan leaders, his voice ringing with false righteousness. "He has forgotten his duty, his people, his very nature, all for a woman whose kind slaughtered our ancestors and who herself killed him in a previous life. She is a weapon, lords and ladies, aimed at the heart of everything we've built." The accusation spread like wildfire through ice. Suspicion poisoned the air. Ilaria's own people, learning of her relationship with Kael, saw it as a betrayal of her sacred vows, a violation of the ancient codes that govern the Moon Court. She was summoned back to her realm, ordered to renounce him or face exile from the only family she had ever known. They met one last time in their secret place, the clearing where ancient oaks grew in a circle, where magic felt alive and breathing. The air crackled with tension and unshed tears. "They're forcing me to choose," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Between you and everything I've ever been, everything my people need me to be. And I'm being ordered to lead my clans against your people if you don't withdraw from our lands," he replied, the weight of kingdoms crushing down on his shoulders. "We're being pulled apart again, Ilaria, just like before. History is repeating itself, and I don't know how to stop it." She stepped into his arms, and for a moment, nothing else existed. His strength surrounded her, her magic wrapped around him. And they were simply two souls who had found each other across impossible distances and now faced losing each other again. Run away with me, he breathed against her hair. Leave it all behind. Let them have their kingdoms and their wars. We'll find a place where no one knows our names, where we can just be. You know we can't, she interrupted, though her arms tightened around him. Your people need you. Without your leadership, the clans will fall into chaos and thousands will die. And my court protects the balance of magic itself. If I abandon my duty, darkness will spread unchecked. Then what do we do? The Alpha Lord, who had faced armies and monsters without flinching, felt helplessness tear through him like a blade. Ilaria pulled back, looking up at him with eyes that held stars in sorrow. We trust, she said softly. We trust that love this powerful doesn't exist without purpose. We trust that the universe brought us back together for a reason beyond our understanding. And we trust that even if we're separated by distance and duty, what we share cannot be broken by time or space or the machinations of those who fear what they don't understand. Tell me in the comments what part of their story moved you the most. Your words mean more than you know. They help us understand what touches your heart. The separation was agony. Kale returned to his fortress, to councils filled with suspicion and demands for action. He navigated political storms and plots, working tirelessly to prevent war, to protect his people, while honoring the love he carried like a sacred flame. Every night he stood on his balcony and looked toward where he knew she was, sending his thoughts across the distance like prayers. Ilaria returned to the moon court, to chambers of crystal and starlight, where she was watched constantly, her every move scrutinized. She performed her duties with precision, offering prophecies and guidance, but her heart remained elsewhere. She poured her longing into her magic, weaving spells of protection that she sent spinning out into the world, knowing some would find their way to him. Months passed like years. The tension between their peoples grew, fed by the Shadow Court's manipulation and the general's continued accusations. Small conflicts erupted at the borders, skirmishes that threatened to ignite into full-scale war. Both Kale and Ilaria worked frantically behind the scenes, trying to expose the true enemy, but the conspiracy ran deeper than either had imagined. It was Ilaria who discovered the truth. During a deep meditation, she received a vision so powerful it nearly shattered her mind. She saw the Shadow Court's ultimate plan. They had engineered everything, the betrayal, the accusations, the growing conflict. They wanted Kale and Ilaria's peoples to destroy each other, leaving the realm vulnerable for conquest. But more than that, she saw their final move, an assassination, carefully planned, designed to look like it had been carried out by Kale's people, that would force the Moon Court into a war of extinction. The target was her. They were going to kill her and blame the Wolf clans, knowing it would unleash a fury that would consume everything. She had only hours to act. Using magic that would cost her dearly, she sent a message across the realms, a cry that only Kale would hear, carrying with it everything she had learned. Then she did something that would be spoken of in legends for generations to come. She walked directly into the trap, knowing she was going to her death, but determined to expose the conspiracy even if it cost her everything. The Alpha Lord felt her call like lightning striking his heart. He knew with a certainty that transcended reason that she was in mortal danger. Without hesitation, without asking permission, he transformed into his true form, a wolf of silver and shadow, larger than horses, with eyes that burned like dying stars. He ran faster than thought, crossing distances that should have taken days and mere hours, driven by love and desperation. He arrived as the assassin struck. Ilaria stood in a circle of ancient stones, surrounded by hooded figures whose hands crackled with death magic. She fought with everything she had, her power blazing like a sun, but there were too many, and she had weakened herself, sending her warning. Just as a blade of pure shadow arced toward her heart, Kale burst through the circle like divine wrath made flesh. The battle was brief and terrible. The Alpha Lord in his full fury was a force of nature, and his love for Ilaria made him unstoppable. He tore through the assassins, his supernatural strength and speed, turning the ambush into a slaughter. But as the last enemy fell, the trap's true nature revealed itself. The entire area had been prepared as a magical explosive, designed to kill everyone present and leave no witnesses. The Shadow Court had been willing to sacrifice their own people to frame the Wolf clans and start their war. "It's going to detonate," Ilaria said, her mage sight seeing the spell activating in seconds. "There's no time to run, no way to stop it." Kale shifted back to his human form, moving to her side. If these were their last moments, he would face them looking into her eyes. "Then we face it together," he said, taking her hand. But Ilaria had not survived 1,000 years across 2 lifetimes without learning something about sacrifice and love and the power that lives in the space between. She turned to face him, her free hand rising to touch his cheek one last time, her violet eyes shining with tears and determination. "Not this time, my love," she whispered. "This time I choose differently. This time I save you." Before he could react, she pushed him backward with a force of pure magical will, creating a barrier between them that even his supernatural strength couldn't breach. "Tell them the truth," she said, her voice carrying over the rising hum of deadly magic. "Expose the conspiracy, save our peoples. Love, Kale. Love, and remember that I loved you across lifetimes, across worlds, across every version of fate that tried to tear us apart. No." He slammed against the barrier, his roar shaking the earth. "Not again. I won't lose you again." She smiled through her tears, beautiful and terrible, a mage princess who had learned that sometimes the greatest power is knowing when to let go. "You're not losing me," she said softly. "Love like ours doesn't end. It transforms. It transcends. Find me again, my Alpha Lord, in this life or the next. I'll be waiting." The explosion lit up the night sky like a false dawn, a pillar of light that could be seen from every corner of the realm. When it faded, Kale stood alone in a circle of scorched earth, Ilaria's barrier having protected him even as it failed to save her. He fell to his knees, throwing back his head in a howl of grief so profound that wolves answered from every mountain, a chorus of mourning that echoed across the world. But in his hand, warm against his palm, something pulsed with gentle light. Ilaria's final gift, a crystal that held a piece of her essence, her memories, her love, and something else. A message in her voice, clear as if she stood beside him. "The end is not the end, my love. Trust the magic. Trust the moon. Trust us. If you believe love can conquer destiny, tap that like button and join our family beneath the moonlight. Because the story isn't over yet. The days following the explosion were chaos. The Shadow Court tried to spin the tragedy as they had planned, but Kale, fueled by grief and fury, and the evidence Ilaria had died protecting, exposed every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal. He brought proof before councils and courts, forcing enemies to face the truth they had tried to hide. The conspiracy crumbled, its architects captured or killed, and the 2 peoples who had been driven toward war instead found themselves united in their grief and rage against those who had tried to destroy them both. Ilaria became a legend, a martyr, the mage who had sacrificed everything to save both her people and his. They built monuments to her memory, sang songs of her courage, taught children about the princess who had loved so deeply she gave her life to prevent a war. But for Kale, she was not a legend. She was the woman whose absence made every breath feel like drowning, whose memory haunted every moment, whose love was both his salvation and his torment. He threw himself into leadership, forging a new alliance between the Wolf clans and the Moon Court, building the peace that she had died to protect. By day, he was the Alpha Lord, strong and wise and unshakable. But at night, he stood on his balcony, holding the crystal she had given him, talking to her as if she could hear him, telling her about the world they were building, the future she would have loved. 3 years passed. The alliance grew stronger, the Shadow Court's remnants were hunted to extinction, and a new era of cooperation began between peoples who had been enemies for generations. Kale became known as the Alpha King, ruler not just of the Wolf clans, but guardian of the entire northern realm. They offered him queens, alliances through marriage, political unions that would strengthen his kingdom. He refused them all. His heart, he said, was not his to give. It belonged to a woman who lived in starlight and memory. But the crystal she had given him had begun to change. It pulsed brighter on nights of the full moon, and sometimes when he held it, he could hear whispers in her voice, fragments of words that felt like prophecy and promise. The Moon Court's wisest mages examined it, their eyes widening with wonder and disbelief. Lord Kale, the eldest mage, said, her voice trembling with awe, "This is not just a memory crystal. This is a soul anchor. Your Ilaria didn't just save you that night, she preserved herself. Her essence, her spirit, everything she was, is held in stasis within this gem, waiting. Waiting for what?" Kale demanded, hope and fear warring in his chest. "For you," the mage replied. "For love powerful enough to call her back. For magic willing to break the rules of life and death. For the right moment, the right ritual, the right sacrifice." They worked for months, studying ancient texts, consulting with every magical tradition in the realm, piecing together a ritual that had not been attempted in 1,000 years. It would require tremendous power, perfect timing, and a sacrifice from Kale himself. Not his life, but something equally precious. To bring her back fully, to restore her not as a shade or echo, but as herself. He would have to give up his immortality, the supernatural longevity that made him more than human. He would become mortal, his years numbered, his strength diminished. He didn't hesitate for even a heartbeat. "Tell me what to do." The ritual was set for the night of a lunar eclipse, when the veil between worlds grew thin and magic ran wild and free. They gathered in the circle of ancient oaks where Kale and Ilaria had last stood together, where their love had been both confessed and torn apart. The Alpha Lord stood at the center, the crystal held over his heart, surrounded by mages who chanted in languages older than kingdoms, drawing power from moon and earth and the spaces between stars. As the eclipse began, as shadow crept across the moon's face, Kale felt his immortal essence being drawn out of him like silk being unwound from a spool. It was not painful, but it was profound. He felt the weight of centuries lifting, felt himself becoming something simpler, more human, more vulnerable. But he also felt something else, a presence stirring within the crystal, responding to his sacrifice, reaching out across the boundary between life and death. "Ilaria," he whispered, his voice raw with longing, "come back to me. I kept my promise. I built the peace you died for. I protected both our peoples. I lived just as you asked. But I need you to live too. Come back, my love. Come home." The crystal shattered in a burst of light so brilliant it turned night to day. Energy cascaded outward in waves that made the ancient oaks bend and the very air sing. And in the center of it all, taking form from light and magic and love that refused to surrender to death, she appeared. Ilaria opened her violet eyes in a world she thought she would never see again. She stood whole and real, her silver hair catching the returning moonlight, her body solid and warm and alive. And before her, on his knees from the force of what he had just sacrificed, was Kale, looking at her with eyes that held wonder and joy and a love that had survived everything the universe could throw at it. "You brought me back," she breathed, tears streaming down her face as she fell to her knees beside him. "You gave up your immortality, your power, everything that made you, everything that made me live too long without you." He interrupted, catching her face in his hands the way he had in their first meeting in this lifetime, the gesture coming full circle. "I would give up 1,000 years, 1,000 lifetimes for one honest moment with you. You were always mine, Ilaria. Across every version of our story, through every ending and beginning, you were always mine. And I was always yours." She kissed him then, and it felt like coming home, like every missing piece clicking into place, like the universe sighing in relief because something that had been torn apart was finally whole again. Around them, the mages wept, and wolves howled their joy to the eclipse-darkened sky. And somewhere in the fabric of reality itself, it felt as if destiny was rewriting itself, learning that some loves are stronger than fate. The years that followed were not easy, but they were real. Kale, no longer immortal, aged as humans do, and Ilaria chose to bind her own extended lifespan to his, so they would walk through time together, neither outliving the other. They ruled side by side, the Alpha King and his Moon Queen, building a realm where magic and nature coexisted, where old enemies became friends, where the lessons learned from their sacrifices shaped policies and peace. They had children, heirs who carried both wolf blood and magical gifts, who would one day tell their own children about grandparents who had loved across lifetimes and refused to let death have the final word. They had arguments and makeups, quiet mornings and passionate nights, ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they had earned them through sacrifice and choice and the unwavering belief that love, real love, is worth fighting for across any distance, any obstacle, any price. And on nights when the moon was full, they would walk to that circle of ancient oaks and remember who they had been in their first life, remember what they had lost and found and sacrificed. Remember that every moment they now shared was built on the foundation of choices made in darkness and faith that light would come again. "Do you regret it?" Ilaria asked one evening when silver touched his hair and laugh lines creased the corners of his eyes, when their children were grown and ruling their own territories, when the wheel of time had turned and brought them to the twilight of their shared mortal years. "Giving up eternity for this, for me?" Kale pulled her close, his strength perhaps diminished by age, but his love only grown deeper with every passing season. "Eternity without you was just a longer loneliness," he said, his voice still carrying that same certainty it had always held. "But this every year, every day, every heartbeat I've shared with you, this is what eternity was always supposed to feel like. You were always mine, Ilaria. And I was always the luckiest soul in any universe, because you chose to be mine too." They stayed in that embrace as the moon rose full and silver over the mountains they had protected together. Two souls who had found each other across impossible distances and built something that would outlast even their mortal years, a love that would be told and retold, generation after generation. A reminder to everyone who heard it that the greatest magic, the most powerful force in any universe, is the choice to love despite everything that tries to make you afraid. And when their time finally came, when they closed their eyes together in the bed they had shared for decades, the wolves howled a farewell that echoed from every mountain, and the moon court lit the sky with lights that spelled out their names in constellations that would burn forever. Because some stories don't end, they transform, they transcend. They become the myths that teach us what it means to love truly, to sacrifice willingly, to believe that even when everything says it's impossible, love will find a way. To everyone who stayed with Kale and Ilaria through their journey across lifetimes, thank you. Their story reminds us that love is not about perfection, but about choice. About choosing each other again and again through every obstacle, every separation, every reason to give up. It teaches us that true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising together. That the most powerful magic we possess is the courage to love deeply, to forgive fully, to believe that even when the world tries to tear us apart, our hearts can build bridges that span any distance. If their story moved you, if you believe in love that transcends time and fate, share it with someone who needs to hear that they are worth fighting for, that their story isn't over, that the universe rewards those brave enough to love with their whole hearts. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of our humanity, our capacity for love, and the magic that lives in choosing each other, always and forever. Until the next story, may you find your own light in the darkness, and may you never stop believing in the power of love to transform everything it touches. The moon is still rising, and new stories are waiting to be told beneath its silver light. Will you join us for the next one?